Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran jazz bassist Mark Wade. He is promoting his newest 2018 CD, Moving Day, and it's a part of his life growing up on the move. He grew up in the upper Midwest, Indiana, Ohio, and more. For the last 20 years, he has been very active in his home of New York City and played with the likes of James Spaulding, Peter Eldridge, Byron, and he has been on the Today Show with Stacey Kent, along with much more. Along with performing and recording, he is a faculty member at a university and a founder and director of the New Music Horizons. So please get to know him and dig this interesting cat, my friends.
Well, Mark, hey, thank you for taking a minute out to talk with me today. I appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. So let's go ahead and start here. This is your second CD, Moving Day, it was released on the 19th, January 19th in Europe, and it's going to be February 2nd here in North America. Talk to me about this release. How do you feel about the album?
Well, I'm feeling really good about it. It's been a few years here in the making. I put out my debut record back in 2015, a record entitled Event Horizon. That record helped to open a couple doors for me, get some notoriety. I was very fortunate that it was well received, both here and abroad. And I've been working on this next CD entitled Moving Day that's out now in Europe, and as you said, coming out here in the States on February 2nd. For about 3 years, I've been putting together the music for this CD ever since I started or finished working on the last CD that I did. So I've been excited to watch the music kind of grow. I've had time to work on it, change it, kind of shape it the way that I was hoping to get, and I was really happy the way things came out on the recording.
How much pleasure does it bring you to be able to go out on the road and to perform this live? Is that a pretty big thrill?
Oh, it's always great. Bringing your music to new audiences in particular is always really exciting to see how people respond. And it's very gratifying as an artist, of course, to find that there are people who are really into receiving your work. So it's something that I've enjoyed and something I'm certainly looking to do more of.
So did you grow up in New York?
No, actually, I grew up around the upper Midwest. As a kid, I moved around quite a bit. I was born in Michigan and moved away after I was about a year and a half and lived in South Bend, Indiana twice, southern Tennessee, outside Cleveland, Ohio, then settled in New Jersey for a while before I went to college at New York University here in New York. And that's how I managed to find my way here. And I've been in New York ever since. So I've been here for quite a while. But all of those journeys and all the moves even within New York were kind of the inspiration to the title of this CD, of Moving Day, of all the different moves and all the different places that I've been.
So why did you pick the bass? What was it about that instrument that called you?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. I hadn't really picked the bass to begin with. Back when before I went to high school, right as I was going into high school, the latest fad for a lot of my friends was to quit skateboarding and pick up an instrument to learn how to play the guitar. A lot of these people wanted to play the guitar. I was kind of late in following the crowd, if you will, along those lines. And I think because so many people were already playing guitar, someone suggested, well, maybe you should play bass. And not really knowing much about it, I said, okay, and I checked it out, and I've been hooked ever since. So it was something that was really suggested to me more than it was that I heard someone play the bass and get turned on to it. But when I did find it, it was definitely something that I jumped at right away and played electric bass right up until I went to college. And into my first 2 years of college, I didn't actually start studying the upright bass until I was about halfway through college as a music major. So it came to me rather late, but I was fortunate that when I graduated a few years later, I was making a living at it. So that was pretty good.
Speaking of college and mentors, who have been big mentors for you? Like advice that they've given you? What's been so healthy for you as a musician?
I studied with Mike Richmond, a great bass player and pedagogue at New York University. And Mike, for those who might not be familiar with his work, Mike recorded and played with all of the big great names of the day and beyond. I mean, having recorded and played with Miles Davis and Stan Getz and just such a long list. A discography. I won't go into in great detail here, but anyone doesn't know him, I say look him up, because Mike's been there and done that with just about every artist, from Miles Davis to David Bowie. And having a teacher that had that kind of breadth of experience, both at a high level of music and across genres, that was a perspective that I really appreciated as someone who did not come to music with jazz as my first love. That wasn't what originally had turned me on to music. It was more popular music. Having someone who just in general had that kind of musical perspective, that there's a lot of good ideas out there and that you should just have your ears open in general, was really good advice that Mike gave me. And that attitude of not immediately shutting things out because of where it comes from or maybe the name or label attached to it has been advice that's always stuck with me.
So you've been over the years. So have you been in New York for about 20 years?
Yeah, I've been here. I've been here for over 20 years now.
So but this is your second solo album. So, I know that you've done work with your trio and you've had orchestral work. So why is this your second? What have you been doing over the years?
Well, it's a good question. A lot of at this point, now that I've entered my 40s here, my first CD came out right before I turned 40. And that's late, obviously, for a lot of people when you're putting out solo records. The usual wisdom is that, you get out of school, you hire some famous people, go into the studio, put out your first record, hope that the famous people attached to the CD maybe get some interest, and then you move on from there. But it was something that I was always acutely aware of, that I did not want to put out a CD unless I really felt it was really something that I felt was special, something really worth contributing, to the music. So I knew that when I was leaving school, while I was making a living as a player and I was a professional, as far as a solo artist, I didn't really feel that my playing or my writing was really ready to put down something that was going to be up to snuff, in my opinion, to the standards that I was holding myself on. And I chose to wait. I chose to wait a long time, a lot longer than many people, to finally put out that first record. And over that time, I've worked as a freelancer in jazz, in the classical field, and occasionally in more popular styles of music. Always kind of biding my time, waiting to see when I was really felt like I could put out something that was going to have an impact. And, having waited all that time, the first CD came out, and I was pleasantly surprised at the response. And it was, more importantly, it was something that I felt I could get behind, and I could be proud of, that something that was really worth doing. So that's why I waited so long for the first one. The second one now is following on the heels of that a few years later. Hopefully, I'll be able to keep releasing records here without too long of a gap in between, and kind of keep the train rolling.
Over the years you performed with James Spaulding and Peter Eldridge and Don Byron. There's been a lot of names and a lot of folks that you perform with, and you're also a faculty member now. I want to know, what did you learn from people that were veterans and had a lot more mileage than you that has helped you be a teacher, to help be a better teacher?
Well, that's a good question. You learn different things from different people, obviously. And sometimes what players like, some of those big names that you mentioned, sometimes what you learn is an attitude and an approach. I would say the number one thing that I would have picked up from the more notable names that I've played with in various fields is the respect with which they approach the music and how committed they are every time they pick up their instrument. That they really just don't allow themselves to sound bad. It is very important to them. Every time they play, it's always going to be for real. And so that was something that, too, that to go back to Mike Richmond, what he had said to me, that you want to play every gig like it's a recording session. The idea being that like every note that you would play would be something you could look back with on posterity, that could be recorded and preserved, and something that, that you could live with, that you would be proud of. And that's something that I try to pass on to my students, that if you're going to play, then be committed in the moment, really take it seriously, and play like your life depends on it in that moment. And when you're done playing, if things don't go well, that's okay. That happens. It's part of the process. You know, you learn from those mistakes and you move on. But if you start with an attitude of really respecting the music and trying to do the best job you can, that's something that will serve you well.
So you've lived in the Mecca of jazz for a long time now. What have been some of the most memorable jazz shows that you've seen that have left a really deep impression on you?
There's been a lot of shows, to be sure. You know, when I first got out of school, I was playing regularly once a week at Birdland here in town, and I was playing the early set, the cocktail set, before the famous people came on for the 8 o'clock show. And part of the perks of that job was that we could stay and then watch whoever was playing that night. So for 2 years, once a week, I got to see whoever the big famous act was that was rolling to New York to play. You know, there was just so many shows from all these different people that come to mind, you know, whether it was seeing Ray Brown play before he passed away, whether it was seeing Tito Puente. I remember that being a really impactful gig, even though I don't play a whole lot of Latin jazz myself. Seeing Gary Peacock in person, seeing, you know, just so many names that rolled through. I'll always remember watching Al Foster for the first time. Great drummer, just his ride cymbal, how swinging that was, how impactful that was. How just one cymbal could seem to shape the entire direction of the band. So, you know, on the spot, it's hard to remember all of them, but just so many experiences, you know, night after night, seeing bands like that, and also seeing another teacher of mine at NYU, Frank Kimbrough, great piano player who plays with the Maria Schneider big band, obviously Grammy-winning ensemble. I remember going to see Maria's band before they got famous at a small club here in New York called Visiones, which is no longer here, back before they were big and famous, and thinking what a special band that was. And that certainly that turned out to be the case.
So let me ask you a generic question. Why do you love jazz?
You know, originally I was drawn to jazz because there was something about it I didn't understand. It wasn't that I heard it and got it and loved it. It was that I heard it and I didn't get it. And it seemed like there was so much going on there I didn't know and I couldn't understand. Kind of like hearing a language that you think is pretty, but you don't really know what their words actually mean. And that's what drew me to it at first. It was that there was a complexity there and a depth, and it was something I wanted to know about. And once I did know about it, I really liked it. And I think that next step of liking it is seeing the freedom and the possibilities that you have, and all of the reward and responsibility that goes with having that freedom in music. You know, really being able to have and hone a direction and an idea in the sound. And if you can do that, whether as a performer or as a listener, to appreciate it, you know, just the possibilities of expression just seem to be endless.
Everyone has a version of who you are. Your family, your friends, your colleagues, those that you play live for and that buy your music. But who do you think you are? When you wake up, you face the day, who are you?
Well, I think that I'm someone who is trying to do the best that he can every day to do and to pursue this music, which is, you know, a seminal thing in my life. It is something I have dedicated myself to, you know, for hours and hours and hours over the course of years, to play music and to play music at the highest level. And for me, I just see myself as someone who is just doing his very best to plug away at that every day and try to just get a little bit better over time, and to keep doing that day after day. Someone who wants to balance the idea of taking the music very seriously, but not taking myself too seriously in the process. And I think that's a life lesson that you can pursue forever.
Awesome. That's a great way to wrap everything up. Mark, thank you for taking a minute out to talk about Moving Day, about your life and music. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Mark for his time and his stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.